Welcome everyone to the launch of the New Home Front initiative. I'm Caroline Lucas, an MP at Westminster and leader of the Green Party, and I'll be chairing this event and introducing the rest of our panel to you very shortly. But first I wanted to say just a very few words about why I commissioned this report, why I think its message is so important, and why I'm excited that it's not just a report that we're launching today, but indeed a whole process, an ongoing process. And really the idea for the initiative stemmed from an overwhelming sense of frustration over the lack of action on climate change and the looming energy crisis. Each month it seems that more scientific data is assembled to underline the growing severity of the environmental crisis, and yet still politicians fail to act with anything like commensurate political will, as I see on a daily basis at Westminster. And as more and more data grows, I think the question really becomes, are we going to go down in history as the species that spends all its time monitoring its own extinction, or are we going to garner the political will to start taking steps to avert it before it's too late? And I recall the words of the great Pete Postlethwaite, great and much missed Pete Postlethwaite, in the film The Age of Stupid, when he plays the last man alive after an environmental catastrophe. The film's set around 2050, and he plays a character who looks back to 2008 or 2009. In other words, essentially he looks back to today, he looks at all of the mounting evidence about the mounting environmental crisis, and he says, in words that still make the hairs go up on the back of my neck, why, knowing what we knew then, didn't we act when there was still time? And that is the question that keeps me awake at night. That is the question really that has led to this report. Because I wanted to find precedents for times when that political will to do difficult things has been found, to look at precedents when the country has faced a major transition and actually been able to deal with it. And that explains, I think, why we're launching a report on climate change at the Imperial War Museum, which might have seemed a little unusual. But there are two very serious reasons for doing that. First, because climate change is one of the greatest threats to our country since the last World War. It's not only environmentalists who say that, business leaders, prime ministers, major charities, generals have all recognised the level of risk. And second, because if we're to overcome that threat, and the alternative is simply too awful to contemplate, then we need to mobilise as a nation in a way that we haven't seen since 1945. And so essentially this new report, the New Home Front, looks at the wartime experience of those on the home front in Britain and explores what lessons we might learn from it in terms of facing today's threats from climate change and the looming energy and resource crisis. And what struck me most about how many positive and at times inspiring lessons we could learn from the wartime generations was just in fact that there was something positive out there, as well as the very obvious negative that we know so much about, because people put up with so much deprivation and disruption not just because they knew there was no alternative, but because they believed that society would emerge stronger at the end of the war. One of the startling statistics I found, or indeed probably Andrew found, put in the report for me, was that 9 out of 10 households actually supported rationing because it was fairer than the alternative of restricting food consumption through prices. And what you get the sense of, and which Andrew will speak about a little bit more, is that small actions added up to a massive contribution. Collecting food scraps, which, due to rationing, were nothing like the amount of food waste that we see in Britain today, was enough to feed over 200,000 pigs, for example. And significantly, despite rationing, nutrition improved and mortality fell sharply. And while people had to forego some pleasures based on consumption, things like attendance at theatres or other amusements rose. And indeed, many would argue, I think, that the social change brought about by wartime measures like rationing and billeting of evacuees actually laid the foundations for the reform of education, for the welfare state, and the creation of the National Health Service. And of course, let me say it right up front, it would be completely wrong to glamorise the Second World War. It was a devastating period in our history. But I think it would also be wrong to ignore the experience and the wisdom of those who lived through it. And that's why, as a follow-up to this report, we're launching a national campaign to bring the generations together and see how their insights can be applied here and now. And so over the coming months, we're finding ways to bring this wisdom into one place and making it available in a new report. We're also launching a competition to find the best ways in which the wartime posters and public education campaigns can be reimagined to help today's society understand the dangers of climate change and what we can do to help. Of course, much of what needs to be done is the responsibility of government. But it's as if country's politicians are scared of their own people
They know that we must act now on climate change, but you get the real sense that they're too frightened to do so because they think that the necessary measures will alienate the voters. Well, I hope this report will start not only to put some pressure on those politicians to act, but also to reassure them that once people in Britain understand what needs to be done and are convinced that everyone will be treated fairly, then they're far more likely to respond with the same creativity and commitment as in the dark days of the war.